Alrighty, so it looks like now we have everyone. So before lunch, we covered some descenting. Now moving right along, I want to get into clothing. Now, when I talk about clothing, I'm going to talk about stuff you can buy at the store. What we want to look for, as ideal fabrics and things like that. But first, the idea of clothing in the woods, there's a few things that we all want to achieve when we are outdoors for long periods of time. Two things specifically. We want to be warm and we want to be dry. Because it really sucks to be cold and wet, especially when you're in the woods for long periods of time. So we want to stay warm and dry. Concept I'm briefly going to touch on, which by now, I'm sure all of you know, is layering. Layering. We all know that it's better to wear several thinner layers as opposed to a t-shirt and then some big bulky jacket. Because when we layer our clothing, no matter what the material, it's really a way to control our body temperature. And how layering works is pretty much the same concept behind, the debris hut, which Matt is going to talk about, is insulation. We have our layers of clothes, and in between those layers is dead air, which is in turn warmed by our body and keeps us warm. It's something that still surprises me. I see, at the standard class is one thing, but even when we get up into some more advanced classes around the Pine Barrens, people still think that just because they spent, $800 on this super high-tech jacket that they can get away with wearing a t-shirt underneath it. And that's just not the case. So therefore, you have two choices. You're either really hot or you're really cold. And an easy way to get hypothermia, and trust me, you can get hypothermia when it's 60 degrees out. A lot of people don't know that. Is... we have that one big bulky layer on and we're hiking and we get sweaty and then we stop that activity and then we cool down twice as quick and set in hypothermia. So by layering, we can regulate our temperature. We get warm, we take off some layers. We get cool, we add some layers. That's why I get a kick out of it, out in the winter in the pines. I'll have on, this King of the Mountain wool shirt, with some long underwear on it, maybe another wool shirt. And I'll look way less bulky than most people, and I'll be toasty warm, and they'll have issues with being too cold. So layering is the best thing. It allows us to regulate our temperature. You never want to just rely on one big, heavy, thick layer. It's not a good idea. Not to mention the fact that by layering, we can shrink the overall puffiness of the amount of clothes we have on. If we have some big poofy jacket on, it's not very easy to stalk in and through the bushes in all these tight spots because we have this big bulky layer. But if we have several smaller layers on, it cuts down on the amount of clothes we have on our body. It shrinks our profile, if you will. No matter what, though, we always want our clothing when we're in the outdoors to be loose and comfortable. Don't confuse that with baggy, though. When we're outdoors and we're doing things, we're constantly adjusting and changing our body position. We're kneeling down and tracking. We're doing that belly crawl. We're stalking. We're kneeling, whatever. And if we have super tight clothes on, that's not very comfortable. So we want something that's loose and comfortable. And, also, if we have super baggy clothes, not only does it make our profile bigger and fluffier, but it's also more stuff to get caught and snagged on branches and twigs and things like that. So loose but comfortable, not baggy, definitely. Hands down, the best outdoor material for cool and cold weather is wool. Hands down. Several reasons for that. It's very, very quiet fabric. Do a prime example here. Let's imagine you're stalking through the bushes and you have this King of the Mountain garment on and you brush by a branch Everybody, shh. A little bit of noise, right? And let's take this one right here. So if animals have a way better sense of hearing than we do, animals will hear that a long distance off. It sounds like swishy corduroy pants. So wool is a very quiet fabric. Not only is it quiet, but it is very, very durable. These King of the Mountain garments, one of the few things my father does endorse is King of the Mountain clothing. It's a wool company. Basically, this wool garment right here is very, very well made. It is woven on one loom in the world, makes King of the Mountain. And the cool thing about wool camouflage is this camouflage pattern is actually woven in. It's different color threads, whereas things like this are printed on. Now, you pay money for good wool. This is an uninsulated shirt right here, and this retails for just over $300, I think. But I will give this garment to my daughter one day to wear. It comes with a lifetime guarantee. Ruth Ann, our old head instructor, is a distributor for King of the Mountain. I believe in the school store or something. There is a way to get in touch with her if you're interested in looking at that stuff. Or, if you come for later classes, sometimes she shows up and is selling some of it. But that is the one wool company I highly recommend. Highly, highly, highly recommend. But don't think that you can't get some cheaper wool garments out there. All sorts of military surplus supply places offer wool garments that, from militaries that are in colder climates, Russia, Sweden, things like that. And you can get reasonably priced wool garments. So don't think that you have to spend an arm and a leg. Companies like Columbia make a series called the Outfitter wool, which are like $150, $175 for the jacket and pants, but they're wool and they're very durable. And if you take care of them, they'll last a long time. The other thing I love about King of the Mountain is its lifetime guarantee. Anything you do to it, send it back, and they'll fix it up for you. Another reason why wool is so absolutely wonderful is it will keep you warm even when it is wet. It will keep you warm even when it is wet. Wool has lanolin in it, which sort of acts as a natural waterproofing agent, but if it does soak through, and I've experienced this many times when I've been out hunting in the rainier weather, that gets wet, it still maintains its insulating properties, even when it is wet. So that is why it is such a good fabric, wool. Quiet, very durable. It'll keep you warm when it's wet. And, if you look out there, like I said, there's all sorts of companies out there that make wool. You can get stuff all the way from a very thin felt all the way up to some super thick stuff that has a windproof and a windproof liner and things like that. So you can find all different grades of wool. So don't think that, you have to go and spend a fortune to get some wool garments. I've even seen wool garments in some of those military surplus catalogs for, $20 and $30 for some pants, which is a steal. And and I'll talk about camo patterns here in a little while. We're actually, we are in cahoots now with King of the Mountain because we are coming up with our own line of King of the Mountain that's not even going to be a camo pattern. It's going to be a sort of a shade of a gray-green that you can then apply your own camo pattern right on top of it. One of the great things about natural camo, if I went into a store down here and I said, I would like a camo pattern. I'd like to be late winter, Florida, Caloosahatchee River Valley. And the guy would look at you like you were crazy. But when I get into natural camo, that's the beauty of it, is when we practice camouflage, we can camo into any area we want to using a few simple steps. But I will get into that in a little while here. But wool is definitely best, other than brain tan buckskin. I'm sure they talked plenty about buckskin last night, and there's so many reasons why that is good. You know, it's a naturally an earth color, an earth tone color. You can camo right on top of it. It's breathable. It's washable. You know, and it's a natural fabric. Very durable and very quiet. So wool is the best store-bought stuff you can get. Let's talk about fleece for a minute. Fleece is almost a second contender, but has anybody ever spent some time near a campfire with a nice fleece jacket? All it takes is one little spark. I remember a couple years ago I was living up in Vermont, and my dad had gave me, what the hell was that? Anyway, my dad had given me this nice like Columbia jacket that had this fleece jacket liner thing. So you could either wear like the outer shell combined with the fleece as a big, nice winter jacket, or you could take the outer shell off and have just like a fleece. So I was making some popcorn. It was at a show at this restaurant I used to manage. And I made this big, huge pot of popcorn the old-fashioned way. And I went to go pour it into a bowl. And as I flipped the pot up, I leaned into the bottom of the pot. And I just melted all the fleece pretty much to my skin in a big round circle. So you know you definitely don't want to get fleece close to a fire. However, you know, fleece is quiet in the woods. It is sort of durable, but it just doesn't quite wear like wool. You know, fleece is pretty much made out of recycled plastic. So it's a close second, but it's not quite there. And definitely keep that away from fire. What was that? It does sort of insulate a little bit when it's wet, but not like wool. It's a close second, but it doesn't necessarily, you know, it's not exactly like wool. But it does sort of maintain some of the insulating properties when it's wet a little bit. And there's all sorts of, you know, get a Cabela's catalog or something like that. They have all sorts of different fleece, puffy fleece, warm fleece jackets and camo patterns galore. Let me talk about cotton for a minute. Cotton is better known as death cloth for winter use. If you have cotton long underwear, use them as rags to clean windows. Cotton has no place for winter weather use. Let's think about some of the properties of cotton. Cotton does not wick away moisture from our body. It holds on to moisture. You know, cotton is great for weather like this, or, you know, in the summertime, there's nothing like it. But in the winter, it really doesn't have a use. It holds moisture on the skin. It absorbs water. And so many people have died from hypothermia because they've had cotton on. So cotton is great for summer, great for weather like this, by all means. But for wintertime, I would not trust my life with it. Now, let's talk about some of the other fabrics our modern scientists have come up with. Some synthetics, polypro, capilene, things like that. It's wonderful materials. You know, I have several sets of Under Armour cold gear, which I wear hunting. I have a couple other different kinds of polypro long underwear. It's great. That stuff keeps you really warm. If you perspire, it will take that moisture off of your body and push it towards the outside of your garments, you know, etc. It wicks moisture, and it allows us to wear thinner, lighter layers. You know, I have wool long underwear, I have silk long underwear, you know, and I always prefer to wear wool. But then that Under Armour cold gear came out, and I found when I was out hunting in really cold temperatures, I could just wear that Under Armour cold gear underneath my wool and really didn't need too many more things when I was sitting on a tree stand or sitting in a ground blind. Whereas I used to I'd wear a layer of silk, and then I'd wear a layer of merino wool long underwear, and then I'd typically wear a wool sweater under that, and then my jacket. So, you know, when I always layer when I'm out hiking around, but when I'm sitting on stand, you know, I'd wear that cold gear and be just fine. However, one thing about synthetic long underwear, and I'm sure anybody who's worn this after a long hike, man, you take that stuff off and it stinks. That stuff, because it wicks your moisture away from your body, it holds the human funk like nothing else. I've taken I've taken stuff off after snowshoeing trips up in Vermont, and you don't even want to see it, much less smell it. It's just horrible. So in the context, remember what I said about scent control. It's one of those things that during a hunting season, you repeatedly have to wash because it really, because it wicks moisture away from our body, it holds on to those human scents very tenaciously. Stinks. Also, I mentioned silk. I have this wonderful set of silk long underwear. It's kind of that see-through silk, very, very thin, good for like early winter, late fall. I absolutely love it. And I'll always try to wear natural, some sort of natural fibers when I'm out in the woods. Now I'm going to get into Gore-Tex. Gore-Tex is one of those things that's great for the weekend warrior. But anything I have ever had made out of Gore-Tex, when I have put it to the type of hardcore use that, people like me and other instructors generally put it through, it does not perform the way it is advertised to. I've had Gore-Tex shoes soak through. I've, been out doing trips and had $1,000, Columbia Gore-Tex suits loaned to me for snowshoeing and had those soak through. It's great if you're out here, a weekend there, but for hardcore repeated use, Gore-Tex does not cut it. And you can rehab those garments. There's a washing machine wash that'll supposedly re-waterproof it and things like that. But it eventually, will wear through. It can only take so much moisture before it soaks through. But yeah, repeated activity just overwhelms that membrane. Another thing about Gore-Tex, it is just like with this jacket here, is very, very, very noisy. Very noisy in the woods. And as a general rule of thumb, for survival or hunting applications, hardcore survival use, you want to avoid nylon clothing. For backpacks, things like that, it's great. Cordura is great. But for clothing, it's just really not good application for survival use because it's noisy, because it can soak through, things like that. Very, very noisy in the brush. Talk about goose down. Goose down jackets are very warm. I talked about the concept of dead air. Think about how much dead air there is in there between all those feathers. But has anybody ever worn a goose down jacket in a rainstorm? What happens to it? Beep! It gets flat and you freeze your butt off. And just like what I said about nylon, typically the goose down is encased in nylon. Another cool thing about goose down, I'm sure there's many of you out here right now that have a goose down sleeping bag in your tent. They're great. And that's one thing I love about goose down is you can compress it, into a really small package and it'll fluff back up. But it gets wet and it's pretty much useless. So once again, not recommended for survival. Now I want to get into, make sure I got the right page here, clothing for stalking. Now I'm going to start moving into some more natural stuff. Clothing for stalking. I will tell you this, and this is sort of what I touched on with layering. The least amount of clothing is the best. The least amount of clothing is best. If you told me, T3, I need you to go out right now and stalk and harvest a pig, or, there were some dire consequences if I didn't do it, I would be wearing shorts and I would camo up my bare body. Because think about it, the skin is our largest organ on our body. It's very sensitive. You can feel every twig. You can feel every puff of air. So whenever possible, I try to wear the least amount of clothing as possible. When I get into natural camo, if I can help it, that camo is going right on my skin. Right on my skin. Yeah, probably. Oh, unless I had my moccasins or these, because I can be almost as quiet in these. And in areas like Florida, Texas, where everything bites, pokes, or stings, You know, here's a great story. So there's this guy who used to work for us, and it was his first time heading out west. He was from Canada, and he was driving out there with another instructor, and they just started to make it into the desert. And he was saying to this other instructor, they stopped at this rest area on the side of the road somewhere in like New Mexico. He's like, yeah, you know, I've always had these dreams of just running barefoot through the desert. And he took his shoes off and he made it about 25 steps before he falls on the ground and is picking all sorts of spines and pokers out of his feet. Because he just totally didn't realize that, you know, deserts are very inhospitable places. You know, as is in this environment, you know. There's a lot of things here where if you're not careful, your bare feet, you know, you could get bit, stung, whatever. So obviously those are things you have to take into consideration. But the less you wear, the more you sense, you know, common sense. The less clothing I have on, you know, the less liability I have, the more I can feel. The less clothing there is to get hung up on branches and things like that. Let me go back to brain tan buckskin real quick. You know, it's excellent in a survival situation, and they mentioned it last night. Until denim, you know, brain tan buckskin was the best, and it almost wiped out the deer populations in this country because it was so popular. You know, it's water repellent. It traps air and it insulates even when it's wet. It's water resistant because you smoke it. And when the active smoke in that buckskin naturally descents it. And not to mention, I mentioned earlier, it's a nice natural base color, which you can use as is, you know, or you can apply camouflage right on top of that. So brain tan buckskin is definitely nice. I encourage you to make some garments out of brain tan buckskin. There's a reason why for a long, long time, you know, all over the world that tanned animal skins, you know, whether it was urine tan or mud tan or whatever. You know, it's funny, an old instructor of ours spent some time over in the Middle East, and urine tanning is real popular over there. He's telling me these whole villages, you know, certain villages are, you know, tanning villages, and this village does that. But he said in the tanning village, they just have this huge vat on the outside of town where everybody, you know, just goes and pees in. So he was all stoked on this urine tan jacket, and he brought it out, and it rained. And, you know, it doesn't smell when it's dry, but when that sucker got wet, man, did it reek. Let's talk about colors and patterns on camouflage. Colors and patterns on camouflage. Nowadays, you look in a hunting catalog for camouflage, there are so many different colors and patterns and types to choose from. You know, whether it's your standard military camos, you know, which has now moved into the digital camo. I see a couple guys and gals wearing that. Or, you know, the old school military camo. You got this stuff, this real tree, things like that. The problem is with a lot of store-bought camo is none of them are very area specific. You know, their real tree and stuff like that does make, you know, camo patterns that are sort of like a palm pine, and then, you know, stuff for pine oak forests and things like that. But the problem with a lot of store-bought camo is, you know, it's never really area-specific. You know, one thing about store-bought camo is it tends to be too contrasty. And what do I mean by that? I mean that there is too much of a difference between the darkest color on the garment and the lightest color on the garment. It tends to be too smooth. Like this jacket, although it's got, you know, this brilliant you know, woods pattern on it. This, because of this material, it's a very shiny garment. And that's another thing I love about wool. Because wool is kind of fluffy and has a little loft to it, it's not smooth and shiny. It breaks up the human outline very good. And you know, something about like especially the older military camo, another issue is the lines in between the colors tend to be very sharp. Where, as you can see on this wool garment, hold on one second. the lines on this wool garment, because the camo pattern is woven in here, the lines are faded and they blend in way better. You know how the military used to check or test, I should say, their camouflaged installations? They used to fly someone overhead who was colorblind, because that colorblind person couldn't see any colors, but they could pick out the harsh lines in between the camouflage patterns, over their gun installations and things like that. A big thing I'll tell you, if you have a pair of military BDUs or that new Digiflage or whatever, take some fine grit sandpaper to it and rough that garment up a little bit. It's going to absorb light as opposed to reflect it, which is another thing animals will see. I don't care how good your camo pattern is, if it's on a shiny fabric, it does not absorb or repel light the way natural things do, and that's why they stick out. And another thing too, you take this camo pattern jacket. If I were to dress someone up in a full suit of this camo and stand them out there in the background, you would still see a person's outline just in a crazy camo pattern. One of my favorite things to do is I'll actually wear two, and the idea, think about the basic idea of camouflage. It is to break up the human outline. When animals look for a human, or even if you're trying to hide from people, they look for that sort of bathroom silhouette of a human. That's why when I go out hunting, I'll wear, this pattern, and then I'll wear a different pattern on for my pants, which serves to further break up my outline. So that tends to be a problem with store-bought camo, is it doesn't really break up our human shape. And that's why I love wool so much, because it has texture to it. It absorbs light as opposed to reflects light, which is a big, big deal when it comes to hiding on people or animal. You want something that breaks up light, and smooth cloth does not do it. That's why another reason why nylon is bad, because it tends to be a very smooth fabric, where wool is not. And that's another thing that I love about buckskin. Buckskin has texture to it. So if you want to get a good set of camo, like I said, go out and buy that store-bought stuff. But take some fine grit sandpaper to it. There's been a whole bunch of students who have come through here. I got this one guy, Jake, a good friend of ours. He actually lives down here in Florida. He was after taking this class in the advanced standard and advanced tracking, when we get into advanced and expert camo, and then scout class when we get into invisibility, he went home and he pretty much specialized. He went out and bought this really fancy airbrush setup. And he was taking these military surplus garments and airbrushing camo patterns onto them. And let me tell you how amazing these things were. I have this picture somewhere. I don't have it with me, but this one camo pattern he made, and he's hugging a pine tree, and he just absolutely disappears. But he purposefully left his hands and his head and his feet uncovered. And pretty much all you see on the tree is these hands and this head just floating there and these random feet. That's why when we get into making our own camo patterns, we can customize to our area. There are a couple camo companies I do recommend that are doing great things. One of them is Natural Gear. Several companies are starting to say, there's all sorts of creatures out here, and if you get a chance on a break, walk around to this building, side of the back of this building, and look at this moth on the door right here. Camo companies are starting to say, there's all sorts of moths and things like that, and lizards and this and that and the other thing that have these amazing camouflage patterns on them. It's a great one. I've referenced that Planet Earth movie again. Look at those snow leopards when they're sitting out on those rocks. They blend in perfectly. It's funny how, because humans, they're just starting to realize that now. It's like, hey, maybe we should look to nature to make some camo patterns. So Natural Gear is one that's taking and making garments that are wing patterns of moths. and that camo is excellent. So natural gear is a good one. King of the Mountain is a great camo pattern. This brown right here, or what is this called, autumn or something, late autumn. This, I have never had an issue with this garment working wherever I have gone. This stuff blends in great. And it's not just the camo pattern. It's because of that wool, because it breaks up the light and absorbs the light as opposed to reflects it. This one does not have a liner in it. They make all sorts of garments. I have this. I have a zipper-up hoodie that's more of a white camo pattern, or like they call it snow camo, but that one works everywhere too. And they make lined and unlined. But yeah, they have a website as well. Let's see, where was I? So anyway, back to colors and pattern. Well, texture of the garment is vital. We want some texture. Anyway, colors and patterns. So what we're looking for, not too much contrast. We don't want too much contrast between the lightest color on the garment and the darkest color. We obviously want something that is earth tones. You see all manner of ungodly pink and purple and blue camouflages out there, which are completely useless. Another one, muted colors. Camo companies nowadays, and think about how marketing works. Think about all that crap when you walk into the store. Think about all those labels, bright colors, things like that. They do the same thing with camo pattern. If anybody's ever been to the camouflage section in Cabela's, you know what I'm talking about. You step out onto a floor that's from here to all the way the wood edge back there, and there's all these camo patterns. So they purposely make certain garments want to stand out to your eye when you're shopping for them. And they don't care about your use of it in the woods. They just want to sell it to you. So they will not go with muted colors. That's why one of the reasons I love natural gear, because I stood there in Cabela's and I looked around and I said, I like that one because it blends in amongst all this other crap. Another thing you want to watch out for on garments. Beware of loud snaps and buttons and zippers and things like that. It's another thing I love about this King of the Mountain. It's got these big old-fashioned buttons on it. Nothing to make noise. I've seen so many garments out there that are, a decent color, and then they have this, huge nasty zipper that you can hear from a mile away. So keep that in mind. Now let's get into footwear. My favorite. Oh, shoot.
What would you wear if you plan on going out and in the wind for an extended period of time and you don't want to have like a knot and with that? What would you use?
I would wear wool. And truthfully, when I'm like in the Pine Barrens working and I have to work out in the rain, I wear commercial fishing gear. I won't even touch Gore-Tex or anything like that. Especially if I don't have to worry about the noise factor, I wear a full-on set of commercial fishing gear, straight up rubber, because it's the only thing I know that, no matter how long I spend in the rain, it's going to repel water. But, I also, too, like if I'm out hunting, sometimes I have like this lightweight storm shell that I'll wear that, I know will repel water for a little while. But, truthfully, if it's going to be long periods of rain, you're going to just want to seek shelter until it passes. I don't even agree necessarily with hunting in the rain. So many people don't recover the animals they shoot in the rain because it washes away the blood trail. So a lot of times I won't even hunt in the rain for that reason right there. But, obviously we want to, if it's really bad, we want to stay sheltered. But like I said, wool will keep you warm, even when it's wet. And the other thing I like about this wool, because the wool fibers have lanolin on them, they dry very, very quickly. I could take this wool garment, and soak it in a bucket of water, and I could just hang it out on one of these palm things, and just the wind blowing by, it would probably be dry in about a half hour. Let's get into footwear. Just like with the stocking, least is best. Barefoot is best. There was a rule with grandfather. Pretty much right around when it got to be above 50 degrees or above, my dad and Rick were barefoot. You know, you'll see it if you come back to the Pines. The caretakers, they'll be barefoot all the way up until November. You know, I did an experiment once. I went when I was traveling around the country. I went 10 months without shoes, and that's not just in the woods. That's in cities, and you can imagine some of the arguments I used to have to get in with people. I used to tell people that it was against my religion to wear shoes, and they were discriminating against me, and that would usually shut them up and, you know, let me get on trains and things like that. And I was planning on making it a full year until I almost stepped on a needle, a hypodermic needle, at this show I was at, this music venue. So then I took that as an omen to put shoes on. I made it 10 months, and my bottom of my feet were so thick I would literally get nails and just pull them right out. Or I would step on glass and it would just cut it, and the pads of my feet were so thick that it never went through to where it would actually bleed. Barefoot is best. You have the greatest sensitivity to train. You can feel every little stick, every little leaf, you know. And not to mention that, but when you're in bare feet, just like I referenced with the fox walking, learning how to fox walk on the gravel, it forces you to go slow. You know, anybody here, the reason we tell people to wear shoes here is because they're cool for a couple days and then they start moving fast. And, you know, even Matt, you know, or anybody I know who always cuts their feet when they're bare feet, it's because you get into a groove and then you start rushing, you know, like you do with shoes on, and that's when you cut your feet. But when you're out in the woods with no shoes on, it forces you to go slow. Because if you don't, you're going to cut your foot. And trust me, you know, modern medicine is something that we take for granted, you know, simple antiseptics. Whereas back in the day, a cut on your foot either meant you were dead or you were losing your leg. You know, simple little cut, kill you. And because it forces us to go slow and fox walk and feel what we're stepping on, it keeps our eyes off the ground a lot of the time. Now, I'll tell you the general rule, and I mentioned this yesterday. The general rule for good stalking footwear, or just good footwear in general, is this. You want a thin sole that is flexible, no raised heel, and you want the whole shoe to be flexible. That's why my favorite, hands down, mass-produced shoe for this are Vans slip-ons. And by no means am I endorsing anything. I'm not paid to endorse anything. These are all companies that I recommend, that I have used time and time again. Vans slip-ons are the first one. Like $35 for a great pair of shoes. Because all those things I mentioned, they allow your foot to move and flex. They have a thin sole with no heel that allows you to feel what you're stepping on. Moccasins are great. And this next company I recommend for both moccasins and winter mucklucks is Steger. It's mucklucks.com. I have one of a pair right here. These are my Steger moccasins right here. They have a thin crepe rubber sole. I can take this moccasin, you know, and roll it up, fold it up, do whatever. These are almost just as sensitive as having bare feet. I love Steger moccasins. Steger mucklucks are great too. They're a moose hide bottom with a canvas upper, and they have a good, you know, decent thickness felt boot in them. They're completely flexible. I've been all the way into like -30 with them and had my feet be plenty toasty warm. I highly, highly, highly recommend Steger.
Is that with socks or without?
With socks.
Wool socks?
Yeah, I had wool socks on there.
Those much with waterproof?
They are waterproof, or they sell this, or a lot of times I think they give it to you. They give you this silicone spray. But, if you're out in snow, you don't have to worry about them because the snow's freezing. It's not going to melt. If you start stepping in puddles and things, then I've had them soak through a little bit. So it's something you got to be aware of. But if it's cold enough, if it's below freezing, you're absolutely fine. I've never had them soak through in snow or anything like that. And the cool thing is the snow just cakes on it, and you can go like that, and all the snow just goes right off of them. So moccasins are great. They give your feet a little bit of protection, unlike bare feet. They allow you to feel the ground, feel what you're stepping on. They don't have a heel. Another great moccasin company is Carl Dyer's. Carl's a good dude. You can send him, you can just order moccasins straight up, or you can send him a tracing of your foot. The same with Steger, actually. And he'll make you a custom pair to your feet. And you can do that with Steger as well.
Is that the same company through Walter Dyer?
I don't believe so. It could be. Let's talk about some other commercial type shoes, non-moccasins. Because one thing I love, I love Stegers and that. But if you're wearing them out about town, they do have this thin crepe rubber sole that will wear through if you wear them on pavement. But Steger is really cool. If you wear through the soles, you send them back and they'll resole them for you free of charge. Or at least they used to. And I'm sure within reason, if you keep sending them back every couple months, they'll probably get sick of you and make you pay for it. But I've sent my mucklucks back a couple times. I haven't had to send these back yet. So some commercial shoes, and I mentioned the Vans slip-ons. Also, wrestling shoes, boxing shoes, weightlifting shoes tend to have a very thin sole. They tend to be flexible, and they tend to not have a heel. So those are great stocking shoes. I'm going to break this. Yeah, wrestling shoes. Wrestling shoes, weightlifting shoes. Never really seen a pair of driving shoes. I'm sure they are. They're probably thin, though. Another company, let me see if I have them back here, which I will be in collaboration with soon, hopefully going to Japan. I had a student, I recommend these shoes. They're called Subos. And a student of ours wrote this company a letter and saying I recommended their footwear. And we actually got contacted by the president, who's from Japan. These shoes are great. They're typically sold. I got these in downtown Santa Cruz in like a trendy little shoe shop. But you see, they have a very thin sole. They're very flexible. The guy contacted with us and said he's interested in collaborating on an outdoor version of this shoe. These are great. You can get them online. It's spelled Tsubo. Once again, very thin and flexible sole. These ones are actually cool because they have a neoprene upper, and so they're waterproof. I've actually stepped in puddles with these and had my feet not get wet. And I love these shoes. And the cool thing about these shoes is I guess these things are meant to hit acupressure points on your feet. And they feel really good when you walk with them. They have a whole bunch of different kinds. The only ones I've ever really looked at are this kind, and the reason I got this was because of the colors, but also the cool camo sole. That's what sold me on these ones. And these retail, I guess, about $100, $110, but totally worth it. I've had these for 3 years now. I've worn them for lengthy periods of time in the woods, hunting, stalking, scout missions, out in society, and obviously they look a little scuffed up, but that's the only thing that they are, is a little scuffed up. They're very, very durable. Also, you may see my dad wearing them, topsiders, boat shoes, things like that. They seem to be, it's funny, I have a niece who's about 14 years old, and she lives up outside of Atlanta. And I went there last year, and I noticed she was wearing these, like, topsider-like shoes. And I guess they're, like, very popular for young girls nowadays. And I got to just rip on my dad for that. I said, you realize those shoes you're wearing are, like, the most popular thing for teenage girls now. So those are great. Once again, they have a very thin sole. They're flexible and no heel, no raised heel. And it's funny, too. You're going to start seeing stuff like this is starting to really hit home with a lot of shoemakers. And I think over the next 5 years, you're going to start seeing heels disappearing from a lot of shoes. These Subos are made for people who live in cities, who walk a lot. And the Japanese tend to be, very, very smart and innovative a lot of times. And if anybody ever spends time or lives in a city, I call these city shoes. And there's a whole bunch of companies that make shoes like this now that have a very thin sole, that are flexible, and don't have a raised heel. Because anybody who has to walk a lot knows that shoes with heels really start to hurt your feet, your knees, and your back after a while. So I think, personally, in the next little while, you're going to start to see shoe companies start to wise up a little bit. Even my running shoes, those New Balances I got back there, the reason I got those, they're super light, but they're also, on running shoes, they're starting to get rid of the heel a lot too. Yeah, definitely. There's big, heavy boots, though, that they sell people, are more a sales gimmick than anything. If your feet is allowed to move and flex and bend the way it naturally is, if it's kept dry, you don't need big clunky moon boots out in the woods. I mean, obviously there are applications for big boots. If you're a construction worker, or there's a threat of dropping something on your foot, or, you're moving through environments where there's lots of big sharp things that you need to protect your feet from, then that's cool. But you really don't need them too much, out in the woods. And people are constantly worried about ankle support and things like that, And if you can feel what you're stepping on, now think about this. If you can feel what you're stepping on, you're way less likely to step on things that are going to cause you to twist your ankle. Most foot and knee injuries occur because people can't feel what they're stepping on, and that they commit their weight before they feel what they're stepping on, which is probably a leading cause of injuries of the foot, ankle, and knee. So once again, just to reiterate what we're looking for. We're looking for a sole that is flexible with no raised heel. We want our shoe upper to be flexible as well, to allow our foot to move as naturally as possible. But the definite thing is the no heel. All right, now I want to get into some stalking tips. Oh, natural camo. Very good. So real quick, and I want to give you 3 steps to natural camouflage. Now, I will tell you this, that there's the 3 steps I'm giving you are the 3 basic steps. The 3 basic steps. The 3 basic steps. There are several steps in between these 3 steps. But if you spend your time with camouflage, you will arrive at these on your own. Now, you can do this directly on your skin. You can do it on top of garments as well. Many, many times have I camoed directly on top of some sort of garment. The first thing we need to do with natural camouflage is we need to dull down our complexion. We as people are very shiny. Very shiny. When we sweat, our bodies get a light coating of grease on them. That same grease that we use to lubricate our spindles. That reflects light, and animals see that a mile off. And you've all seen it. You know, you go a day without bathing. I can see it in a lot of your faces now. Face gets all shiny. Happens to the rest of our body. We need to dull our body down. So what do? We take handfuls of dust, handfuls of sand, handfuls of dry wood ash, because we all know that wet wood ash creates lye. And even if we coat ourselves in dry wood ash and it rains or we sweat, it is not concentrated enough to turn into lye and to burn us. You never, ever, ever want to apply wet wood ash to your body. You will get serious chemical burns and need to be rushed to the emergency room. So, dry, dusty wood ash, sand, dirt, anything we can find that'll dull down our complexion. And we do it everywhere, our head to our toes. We need to get rid of that shininess completely. The next step, using mud, charcoal, clay, anything we can find. And this is why these camo patterns are awesome, because we can gather substances that are in our natural environment and work with those. Therefore, they're going to be customized to our area. So after we dull our overall complexion down, we then need to break up our outline. We'll take charcoal and we'll do blotches and streaks across us. You know, almost like you see in these jackets, in camo jackets. Breaking up our human outline, because animals look for that bathroom silhouette human outline. So we put blotches of mud on us. But remember, we want to adhere to those principles of good camo I talked about. We don't want really super contrasty patches and things like that. So we really want to try to look at an area and say, I want to try to make myself blend into that area and go from there. So we want to break up our outline head to toe. Very important. People always forget very important areas of their body. Their neck. If you get all camoed up, you know, I love it, man. Advanced standard or advanced tracking and awareness class comes along, and it's the day where the whole class gets camoed, and people are like, T3, how you like my camo? And it, you know, looks all good, and then they turn around and they just have this pale-ass neck that sticks out. Or they forget back here. Or down in here. Or the backs of their legs. You really want to make sure that you got good 360 degree coverage. The third step is what is known as the final fuzz. The final fuzz is basically I would take and I'd walk out here, or I'd walk out there to a good open clearing of dirt with a bunch of debris. And I'd grab handfuls of debris and drop it on my hair and rub it in my hair. I would roll in the dust and debris and collect all sorts of little particulates all over my body. Because what's that doing? That's creating texture. Things that are going to absorb light and not reflect it. So you get all these little fuzzy bits and crushed up leaves and crushed up grasses, and you just sprinkle them all over you. Or, you know, once again, my favorite approach is I would just go out to an opening in the forest, you know, some debris / dirt like this, and I would just get down there and roll in it and pick up piles and throw it on my back and scruff it in my hair and just make sure that I tried to get an overall fuzziness to my body. I'm going to break this thing again. Ghillie suits do have their place. However, if you're stalking or moving in tight brush, they get hung up very, very easily. There are a couple new ones that are advertised as, you know, snag-free and things like that. You know, once again, it's great. That's what we're going for, to really break up our human outline. And they can be effective, but you're not going to want to go stalking through nice tight thickets with them, because you're going to get hung up. And then you're going to create a whole bunch of motion trying to get yourself out. So those are just 3 basic steps to natural camouflage. There's a couple in between number 1 and number 3. that if you spend time with this skill, you will find out on your own. But otherwise, you're going to have to come back to the advanced standard and the advanced tracking to learn the rest. Now I want to get into stalking, some stalking tips. Because now the puzzle is almost complete. You guys have those stalking and fox walking in your toolbox, and now you have a little bit of knowledge about camouflage. Let's talk about stalking tips. First thing is to be patient. We're such an instant gratification society that, and I'm guilty of this too. We want it and we want it now. If you think you're gonna just stalk and touch an animal, 1 out of every 2 times or even 1 out of every 10 times, you're absolutely nuts. The ability to get into an animal's personal space without it knowing is an absolute art form. An absolute art form, strictly because animals are so aware. We're not aware anymore. We don't have predators. We don't have to be aware to be alive anymore. Animals do. It's funny, talk to somebody who lives in grizzly country or mountain lion country, and it's amazing what not being at the top of the food chain does for your awareness. Animals still need all their senses to stay alive. In most cases, we do not. So that's some significant hurdles you have to overcome. So be patient. Another thing is you really need to look at the overall area which you're stalking. There's so many factors you need to take into account. There's so much more involved than just you seeing that animal and stalking towards it and touching it. Like I said, that 66 second per step stalk. If that deer or that animal or whatever is all the way over there, and I do that, by the time I get where that animal's going to be, or that animal was, it's going to be next Christmas. It's going to be long gone. We have to learn to read the overall environment. Not only that, but I can't tell you how many times I've been stalking or hunting an animal and got so focused locked on that animal, and it happened to me this morning when I was out hunting. I was so focused on one thing that I forgot about the squirrels. There's been so many times where I've been hunting deer or whatever and had the squirrels tell the deer that I was there. The deer didn't even see me, but all the deer's got to do is hear that squirrel alarm call, and it turns around and goes, and it doesn't even know why. It just knows that squirrel's alerting to something, and it's gone. Same thing with birds. I remember one hunt, I was sitting there on my ground blind, and I watched the sharp-shinned hawk come cruising through the trees, right about 10 feet off the ground. And I turned my head to follow it, and it saw me. And it swooped back around and landed in a branch right above my head and looked down at me and started screaming at me, alerting everything in the woods. Not just hawks, any birds. You have to watch out for the birds. You have to watch out for the squirrels. Animals are all in cahoots. They have the animal internet. If there's a fox moving, and it all has to do with those concentric rings. That's why, I can be out in the woods and tell if there's a fox or something here or something there, because the animals all alert each other. Another thing is you have to learn how to read your natural environment. If you're out stalking on a windy day, don't forget things like when those wind is nice and gusty and making a lot of noise, I don't have to stalk through that. I can make a whole hell of a lot of noise just as long as it's not louder the overall noise that the wind gust is making. And when that wind stops, I stop.
Same with rain.
Huh?
Same with rain.
Same with rain. Just as long as the noises and motion you are creating is not out of context with everything else. Another thing you got to watch out for, especially when you're crouching and moving low, is knocking brush and saplings and trees down at the base. Because if you're stalking through the woods, now watch this. Let me get this thing to stop moving. Watch what happens when I tap it down here. See all that movement that's translated through that sapling? Even if it's a windy day, I can tell when stuff is moving out of context with the rest of the motion of the woods or the plants or whatever, and animals can too, and they will alert to that. You know, you have to use things to your advantage when you're out in the woods. You know, it's a chess game. If there's an animal feeding along this edge here that I want to stalk, I'm not going to stalk straight across this open place to it. You never, ever, ever stalk to where that animal is. You stalk to where that animal is going to be. So if there's a hog or turkey or deer feeding along this field edge, I'm not going to stalk towards it. I'm going to go back here and cut over this way, and I'm going to intercept it. You will never, I don't care how good your stalking or camo is, you never ever stalk directly towards the animal. You make informed decisions based on your dirt time and your experience on where that animal is going. And think about all those factors. You know, not only do you have to be a good stalker and good at camo, you have to know your environment. You have to know be a good naturalist and know the animal's behaviors and habits. That's one thing I really love about stalking and camouflage. Is that, in all these skills, is that they all rely on each other. They're all connected, in one way or another. Another very important factor, you always approach downwind. Things like turkey stuff, it's not so much of an issue. They don't really smell you. But most mammals, you always approach downwind. Even if you think you've masked your scent to the utmost. You always approach downwind. Always, always, always. And that's a frustrating part about hunting is because you can't always count on the wind going in that same direction. There's been so many times where I've been like right there and then the wind just switches direction. And you watch that animal, pops its head right up and looks right at you. So always approach downwind. And I referenced this earlier. Pick a route of travel that provides you with the most cover. You never want to get caught out in the open. I'm always looking, whenever I see an animal and I want to stalk towards it, I immediately take a look at all my possibilities. I say, I'm going to go from here to that bush, to that tree. I'm going to crawl across this little opening, and weave my way in through here. Use the natural environment to the best of your ability. And right along with that, you want to avoid noisy routes. If I can avoid going through dry leaves, even if I know I can pretty much effectively stalk across dry leaves, I'm going to avoid the dry leaves. It's not worth the chance if I don't have to take it. So avoid really noisy routes if you can. Stick to shadows is another good one. By going to puddle of shadow, I'm better off. I'm never out in the open. I don't have to worry about my shininess if I'm going from shadow to shadow to shadow.
What about night? Like when you're before daylight?
You still always want to stalk in. There's been so many times I've been tired 4 or 5 a.m. going into my ground blind and just not paying attention, literally almost walked right into deer, and they scare the crap out of you, and I've fallen over a couple times. Yeah, always be smooth. There's never should be a time when you're out there when you let your awareness lag, or you say I don't need to do this or I don't need to do this right now, because the minute you do that, you're pretty screwed. If I have to, I'll use like a red light or a blue light, things like that. As little light as possible. And I will tell you this, we as humans have amazing night vision. It's one thing I love about standard classes, especially in the primitive camp. We have this part of the driveway you got to go up to get to the portable toilets. And at night, you see all these headlights and flashlights like bobbing up and down walking in a trail. You get a couple classes up, you won't see a flashlight at night. You don't need them. You don't need flashlights. We have amazing night vision. Most people don't ever give their eyes long enough to adapt to the light. You don't. Even on a moonless night, you give yourself a half hour, 40 minutes, you can see just fine. People don't trust in themselves. They don't believe in their senses, If you don't believe me, try it tonight. After lecture or whatever. Say, screw you, flashlight, I'm not going to use you. Give your eyes a minute. You'd be surprised at how good they are. Another couple things. If you haven't understood this already, you guys have a lot of brain repatterning you have to do. When people think of animals, when people think of deer, they think of Bambi out there in the field feeding. They think of bunnies, and they think of the bunny out there in the open feeding and being all cute. Animals are not dumb. In the woods, you will very rarely see the whole animal. People go in the woods and they want to see that whole deer, that whole rabbit, or that whole this, or that whole that. When animals purposefully use cover and hide very well. So we need to retrain our brains to look for the littlest movement, the flick of a tail, the movement of a leg in through some brush. Because animals will go from, thicket to thicket to thicket, never exposing themselves if they don't have to. They will never expose themselves if they don't have to. So we have to look for these little fine movements, and that's why wide-angle vision is so good. My dad will talk more about that tomorrow. So we have to retrain our brains, and get rid of that thought that we're going to see the whole animal in all its majesty. Very rarely do animals come out into the open because they're not safe if they do. So just look for those little fine movements. And more importantly, if you want to be good at stalking or good at hunting, observe animals in their natural environments anytime you get a chance to. Anytime you get a chance to sit and watch some deer feed, watch how they are, how they react, how they act, Observation is crucial to all this stuff. We can observe things in their natural habitat, how they naturally move, and then we can apply that to our experience and use it accordingly. As you work on this more and more and more, at first you're going to feel like an alien in the woods. You're going to feel stupid. You're going to feel like you're not doing things right. But, the more and more time you spend in the woods, the better you'll be. The more you'll learn to move with the ebb and flow of nature. I love windy days like this because, it allows you to move in the woods and ebb and flow. The days that scare the death out of me are those completely, absolutely still days. When there's absolutely no wind and nothing to hide your movements. Oh yeah, man. Back up east, on a really windy day, the white-tailed deer won't even come off their beds if it's windy. If it's really windy, because they can't rely on their sense of smell or their sense of hearing if it's really windy. So I've harvested several deer where I've stalked up on them from behind where they're laying on their beds. 5 feet, an arrow. Right in the side. Never even knew I was there. They can't trust their senses on days like that. They just won't get out of their beds. Anything else before I put you guys on break? You guys have any questions?
What do you think about bright orange in camouflage?
It's definitely a good idea because you don't want to get shot. Up in Jersey, the rule is if it's gun season, you got to wear bright orange out in the woods. Because, I don't trust anybody with a gun. Once again, deer don't see color, but birds do see color. So, it's a good idea if you're worried about getting shot. Trust me. So I would at least wear some piece of orange, especially if it's gun season.
With all that the deer is thinking about, what makes it want to jump in front of the car's headlights?
I'll tell you why most deer get killed every year. And the majority, 95% of deer get killed during the rut. When the adult male deer are establishing territory and chasing after female deer. And, we all know, or the does are really only ready to breed for 1 week out of the whole year. Now, the boy deer they start getting horny about 3 weeks before that week. And they spend, literally, when a male deer is in the rut, it does not eat, sleep, or do anything except chase smaller bucks and chase women for about a 3-week period. So the reason most deer get killed by headlights is because it's a small, immature buck being chased by an adult deer, an adult buck, or, it's a female who's not ready to breed who's being chased by a buck. And I mean, there's always exceptions to the rule. Other than that, I can't really tell you. Animals have to cross roadways. A friend of mine had this really good theory once. I think he was high on acid or something, and he said, I think the reason animals get killed is because they walk to the edge of the road and they can't see anything. So then a car comes and lights up the road and it says, oh, there's nothing there, and runs out on the road and gets killed. So who knows? But, that reason, that the rutting behavior is that's when 90% of roadkill happens, is when the rut is on.
Did you say birds do not see color?
Birds do see color.
Birds do see
Yeah.
color, but deer do not?
Yeah, deer do not.
Okay, and then the other question is, that rutting season you're talking about, when is that?
Typically up in New Jersey, it's the first week of November, or can be within the first 2 weeks of November. I know in places like South Texas, it can be like the last week of December. So the further north you go, the earlier in the fall it is, and the further south you go, the later it is. And I think down here, when I was hunting with those guys last year, I think they told me it's like the first week of December down here. But typically in the Northeast, it's right around somewhere between November 1st and, the middle of November. And it typically, the way the rut is started is it has to do with moon phase and daylight. And I know, personally from experience that if it's really warm right around those times, it can confuse the rut, and make things wishy-washy. Ideal deer hunting conditions you want for the first week of November are, you want warm weather followed by a cold snap right in that month there, and that in combination with the light, the sun moving, or not the sun moving, but daylight. The length of daylight being shorter will set the rut off. And there's also there's another rut, at least up by us, that starts in, right around the first week of January. And that's usually when the yearling deer go into heat. But that's a much shorter, briefer rut. Another question over here?
Will animals that don't see color be harder to stalk at night? Will they have better vision?
Animals, as a general rule, will have better night vision than us, but that's really not the issue at all. I think it's just that, they spend a lot more time in the woods than we do. Certain animals can see better at night. And if you do research on the internet, through science, they've figured out all this stuff about animals' vision and, which animals, some animals see how. I actually found this website once, and I can't tell you what it is, but it shows you all these pictures on how certain animals see things. So it'll have how humans see this scene and how deer sees this scene and how pheasant, and it's, you could probably do a Google search on it and do animal vision or something like that. Okay, no more questions. You guys are on break.